my presentation screen? Yes? Good. I always check.
Yes.
Great. So welcome to this presentation taking place on the very special day of the 29th of February, which doesn't happen very often. My name is Sarah Barber, for those of you who don't know me. I'm co-operating agent for IEA Wind Task 43. And I'm really excited to welcome you to this presentation today, this webinar, which is called Culture and Coopetition for Driving Digitalisation. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to the topic and show the results of the questionnaire that you were so kind to fill out when you signed up. And then we're going to move on to 3 examples of culture and coopetition from Jules, Paddy and Bethany, who will introduce their topics when they get there. And then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions as well. Feel free to write any questions in the chat, and also because we're quite a small group, and you can just speak as well if you want. It's fine. We have quite a relaxed atmosphere here at Task 43, so no question is a stupid question, in my opinion. So just an introduction to this topic and what we're even talking about today. Why are we talking about culture and coopetition? Some of you may know that as part of Task 43, we wrote a paper called The Grand Challenges in the Digitalisation of Wind Energy. Actually, before I do that, I just realised I didn't really tell you what Task 43 is, in case you don't know. The IEA is the International Energy Agency, and they organise a technology collaboration programme, which is an international collaboration trying to get people to work together internationally. And there's many topics. And within wind energy, there's also many subtopics. Like, I don't know, like LiDAR technologies or airborne wind or lifetime extension. And so digitalisation, this Task 43, is one of those. So we're trying to improve collaboration in the industry internationally, basically. And so as part of this, we actually wrote a review paper called The Grand Challenges in the Digitalisation of Wind Energy. And part of it was interviewing some people and doing a survey about the main challenges. And this graph basically shows why we're looking at culture and coopetition. So these were the top 3 challenges. So data accessibility, culture and change management, and then knowledge sharing and standardized communication, which is why we came to the conclusion that culture and competition were important. Also, I like this graphic from Andy Clifton, who was the lead author of this paper, who demonstrated this as a vicious cycle. Because we can't get access to real data, we can't show the real world usage of any innovations, which means we can't quantify their benefits, and which means we can't get early users, which means we can't get access to more data. And this kind of goes around in a circle of not being able to be innovative. And so one of the questions we're asking is, how can we get out of this? And this is where the topic of culture comes in. And we came to the conclusion that the 3 main challenges are data related. So it's really about data standards, data structures, culture related, and coopetition related. The word coopetition is a mixture of cooperation and competition, and it kind of means mutually benefiting from each other by comparing methods and results. And so overall, the vision of Task 43 is to unlock the full value of wind energy through digital transformation. And the mission is to act as a digital transformation catalyst by driving open collaboration within and beyond the community, to deliver insights, recommendations, standards, and tools in these 3 key areas of data, culture, and competition. We've got this graphic, which I don't have to talk about for too long, but basically what we're doing is around these 3 working groups on these 3 topics. And all this bit on the right is all about actually trying to get real use cases, real business cases into the activities we're doing in these 3 areas. And so what are we doing as part of these working groups 2 and 3, which are the culture and competition working groups? One thing we're doing is trying to learn. So we're currently planning a survey, which is going to be released hopefully in time for Bilbao, the wind energy annual event in 2 weeks. And we're inviting speakers, we're carrying out a literature review, and we're just trying to understand what is this topic of culture and why is it important. We're also running workshops on digital skills, so trying to work out what skills are people missing and what do they need. We run workshops on funding, which is basically how do we get more money to actually carry out more activities, because IEA tasks don't involve funding, they just involve aligning. So we want to actually work out, can we write some funding proposals together? And then on the coopetition side, we're also trying to learn about what coopetition is and how it can be beneficial through speakers and through a literature review. We've actually in the process of founding like a SCADA data user group where we learn from people using SCADA data, learn from each other and hopefully benefit the entire industry. We also have this project called We Do Wind, which is my thing actually, but it's kind of embedded into Task 43, and it's about trying to find ways of incentivizing data sharing. And then we also have funding workshops for that topic. And we're trying to develop an open data and software community. So we want to develop best practices for sharing software, for example. And the idea is that this will then lead to, first of all, recommendations for fostering digitalization through culture and coopetition, but then demonstrations of how to do that, to inspire people and also to learn. And then also new funding proposals for doing so. We've got this crazy diagram now. Don't get too shocked by all this detail. We're actually, as part of all these activities, coming up with this concept of a holistic, human-centered, open innovation ecosystem. The central part of this is like a data platform, which includes open wind energy data and code. And if you want to actually build this, you need some sort of semantic artifacts, so things like ontologies and taxonomies, which are describing the data in a standardized way. We're actually in working group 1 of Task 43. We're building up this community, and we want to then publish all these ontologies so that people can use them to describe their data. And so that's kind of going on, and that's going to be fed into this data portal. On the left-hand side at the bottom, we have the open source data and code community that I already mentioned. And on the right-hand side, the idea is to actually encourage usage of this data and the code by running these so-called We Do Wind challenges, which is all about saying, getting people to publish more data by saying, if you publish data, we will get a community of people to work to improve your methods, your algorithms, your codes, and then those improvements will get fed back into this portal like that. So this is kind of this open innovation ecosystem that we're aiming for. And then we're thinking about business models for running this, because if anyone, by the way, knows, has got any ideas about open data, open source business models, I'd be really interested in having your inputs. I've got a student working on it right now. But the kind of idea is that we say, okay, there will be some people wanting to keep their data private, and they can still be involved in this ecosystem. They can still use these open ontologies, but their data stays private, and they can still do these challenges, but it stays private, and they pay for supporting the rest of the ecosystem. That's kind of one of the things that we're working on at the moment in Task 43. So that was a very quick, I'll provide you the slides afterwards so you can have a look at that in more detail. I don't want to talk for too long. So quickly, just the results of the questionnaire. If you remember when you signed up, we had the question, how well does the culture in your organization enable or foster digitalization? And I think 5 was very well and 1 was not at all. So we kind of have let's say an average probably of 3 and a third or something. So reasonably, I would conclude. I was going to sneeze. And then the question, which of these what are the positive aspects of the culture in your organization related to digitalization? We had a few suggestions, and collaborative culture comes out at the top. So 10 of you said that your organization has a collaborative culture, which is really great. And 7 said that they have an open feedback culture. Other things that came up quite high there. And then we asked the same questions for negative. So the top things that came out there were lack of agile project management, no digital skills training, a lack of a digitalisation strategy and a digitalisation budget, which is also quite interesting. And then what are you hoping to learn at this webinar? I thought it was also quite nice to put that on. So strategies and evidence for improving digital maturity, new ideas about culture and competition from people who are successful, just more information in general, best practices. So I hope some of these things yeah, you actually managed to learn some of these things today, but if not, maybe in the future from future events. So now I'd like to pass on to the 3 speakers to give presentations, and hopefully this is going to provide you with some ideas and inspiration. So Jules, Paddy and Bethany, I'll ask you to speak for about 10 minutes on the topic of your choice. Yeah, looking forward to hearing. So Jules, do you want to take over first?
Sure. First, I'll put a face to the name just before I come off the bandwidth. Nice to be here and see everyone. Let me just share the screen. Let me know when you can see.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. So I'm Jules from Twino Technologies. We are a software company, and we've made a planning and execution product for wind energy installation and O&M. With a more of a human-centric approach, and it allows us to intelligently plan, to smart report on specific jobs that are being performed, and to facilitate human capital support. So that's upskilling less experienced workers and bringing kind of their needs to the table. We launched our official commercial product early this year in January, and we currently have around 1 gigawatt of wind turbines being serviced with Twindo. So that's the plug over for now. When we think about data science for the benefit of wind energy, we tend to think more about production data, condition monitoring sensors, mechanical parts, energy trading, things like this. We don't immediately think about the people behind wind energy and the way in which their work contributes to data and ultimately to the success of projects. And I mean by that technicians and planners, coordinators, etc. And this is all tied up with culture. And in this presentation, we'll dive into the relationship between technicians, back office management, culture, and how this affects installation and O&M projects in wind energy. And we'll touch specifically on 4 areas, which is adoption, execution areas, team culture and composition, and business side relations. All right. So the S word in and the S word out as far as data goes. A fundamental requirement for good data is the creation and ingestion of quality, unbiased data. This is easier when dealing with more binary aspects like mechanical parts or electrical signals. But this is trickier when dealing with people and their temperaments. I mean, if you ask a question to a person in the morning after date night on a sunny day, there may well be a different answer to asking them the same question on a dark, rainy day after being stuck in traffic for an hour in the morning. So also, essentially, this is how it can make people feel, I guess you could say like that. Adoption of software is absolutely one of the areas that we want to start upon. This is essentially the start point for any human-centric data, and that's the place where we focus on at Twindo, especially for technicians. They're doing a tough job under hard conditions, and submitting different types of data is kind of felt like a pain for them, and it kind of lacks their attention. And that's where this slide comes in. It kind of makes them feel like this. And when we made our technician-facing app, we used a focus group of over 50 global technicians from asset owners, OEMs, and ISPs to create and test our technician-facing mobile app, ultimately to cater to their needs. And then once we understood some information about them, we reverse engineered how to extract data in a clever way that wouldn't bother them, basically. And during this interview stage, we actually got 100% feedback that technicians said they require more information about the job they're performing to adequately perform their tasks to the highest quality and safety standards. That's all of them had an issue with this, which was quite remarkable. 77% didn't know the process to report a safety incident, which I also thought quite remarkable. They would actually ask a lead manager or someone above them. And often they would not want to report an incident for fear of reprisals. If they're a subcontractor, they might not get a secondary contract, or for instance, if they're on a project and this causes quite a problem for the project managers or people in authority, they might not be the most popular person. And let's say you're on a vessel, an SOV, and you're living on that vessel with all of the project workers and management, then you might not want to be in the situation where you're not a very popular person there. So also very interesting. It's not a great signal for reliable quality data, of course. We use this technicians, interviews, system testing, and heat maps to develop and reiterate our solution that faces them. Unsurprisingly, we got pretty good adoption rates for the product from technicians, and that's really a place where we emphasize. Then we found nifty ways to extract unbiased data from our smart reports, specifically DPRs, that's daily progress reports, and checklists to determine specific variables that influence the estimated time and risks in specific jobs they're performing. And that's based on the task, the workers' hard and soft skills, team members' hard and soft skills, the location, the weather at the time of completion, the quality and safety points, and more. So it's an absolute gold mine out there in finding anomalies and trends from the human-centric side of jobs, which is the first step in addressing them for the betterment of the whole value chain ultimately. So, of course, having a much more thorough idea of how people work will make your project more successful. And that's precisely one of the areas that we work with in Twindo for project and job prediction engine. So the next area we want to check out is safety and quality. I see the chap there is not been following the policies. And yeah, it's very pertinent. I've observed this extensively firsthand. I was in the wind industry for 11 years as a technician, engineer, and project manager. Most importantly, safety culture and quality culture are institutional policies, regulations, and mandates from these companies. But there's also it's not unknown to have a just get it done culture as well, specifically when projects are falling behind. And that could be contrary to the company policies and to the perspective of technicians from the project inductions or the kickoff meetings. So there's some alignment there. Naturally, if there's a safety incident, it's a huge resource intensive action that needs to be made. There's immediate tools down to stop. You have corrective and preventative action straight away. There's investigations. The down tools can sometimes last for days before it goes through the correct HSE channels, etc. Again, something I've experienced firsthand on a number of occasions. Quality issues as well. In the best case can be non-conformity reports, NCRs, so it means asset revisits, rework, or warranty jobs, and all of which have an indirect consequence to the schedule of the project, and of course things like extra vessel traffic costs, taking resources that are allocated to other schedules and rechanging. So of course the worst case scenario for quality is catastrophic failure in the asset, which of course terrible, and the other is safety incidents, which is obviously the highest priority there. So I've seen all this happen before, and there's definitely room to be improved. We need to look at things in a slightly more holistic sense, and that's kind of how we do that. Okay, so another valid area to look at is team culture and composition. I'm sure some of us might have worked in teams before where the culture was not totally aligned with our own opinion, and that can negatively affect the quality and deadlines of our work. An area we focus on in Twindo is understanding individual worker hard and soft skills. It can even be their dispersonalities as well. So when you're managing, say, 20 people that you know quite well, it's relatively easy to understand who works well together and whose individual skills or knowledge complements one another. But it's not really scalable, especially if you don't know those people. So to fully understand the composition factors, we need repetitious data, which is actually one of the luxuries we have in wind energy. By understanding the team composition's impact and how that affects the time and the quality of jobs performed, and combining that with other job-specific data, we can more accurately plan and execute projects or service. Basically in a way we've not been previously able to do. You'd need a massive headcount to be able to do that in a real-time situation, and we do that with technology. And a nice benefit of this is that, well, people can be a little bit happier. and we know that nicer things can happen when we are feeling good. Okay, now let's have a look at another side as well. And you can see this is us and them, but it's specific to the business side relations, so the back office and the technicians. Yeah, no surprise that not much data is available in wind. So I took a look at construction data specifically to dig deep into this. This data shows significant divide between back office and and technicians, which is something that confirmed my assumptions. So the data from USA, from a very large case study, was 75% of back office workers feel they maintain a good work-life balance, while only 50% of technicians felt their work-life balance was good. And you have to remember that some technicians are away for months at a time. So we really need to support technicians more. They are, after all, responsible for a much larger part of asset uptime than they're given credit for. There's also the risk of an us and them mentality too, between the office and technicians. And that's a total breakdown of communications and workflows that are not in sync. This is an absolute project efficiency killer. And on a number of occasions, I've seen this turn into minor underhung mutinies, which causes significant project issues, even if they're not brought to the forefront or even if they're not noted. So better catering to the needs of technicians and expectation management and improving the data flows doesn't always mean more communication. It just means better communication is key. Because when it's all in sync and it's working well, wonderful data and resulting action based on that data is an absolute growth driver. And that's a vital ethos here at Twindo. So in summary, there's like this great quote, which is, it takes a village to raise a child. And I don't know about anybody else here, but as a young parent, I could have definitely done with more hands to help. But the same too can be said for wind energy projects. It takes entire teams. It takes departments, technicians, planners, coordinators, project managers, clients, suppliers to make a successful project. And everyone is an integral and often overlooked part of the process, specifically those ones working out there in the field. And on Twindo, we're on a mission to use culture as part of a holistic approach to project planning and execution. So if anyone is interested in collaborating, specifically on R&D and acquiring subsidies, or if you're interested to use the system, feel free to reach out on my email address here. And thanks for listening. I hope it's useful.
Great, thanks very much. Let's move to the next speaker. You can always write questions in the chat, but we'll have a Q&A at the end. I think, Paddy, you're going to be the next, yeah?
That's it, yeah. Hopefully we can see the slides, guys. And I'll just make sure I can see them as well, it would help. Okay, so yeah, look, so it's I suppose this is going to be short and sweet, 10 minutes. And I titled it Connecting Some Dots. Originally, I had Connecting Dead Dots, but I think it was probably a bit too ambitious. So I just want to look at maybe data, coopetition, culture. And for me, they're all related. And sometimes the challenges with data are very related to collaboration issues and collaboration issues with culture change issues. So my name is Paddy O'Reilly. I'm mainly based in Cork University Business School. I suppose for this presentation, really, I'll be drawing on my experiences. I started my career as a mechanical engineer with GEC Alstom, as it was called then, now Alstom. And from there, worked on a whole range of innovation projects in different industries. And I suppose learning from what works, what doesn't work within different initiatives. A lot of it is driven off large networks, so large networks of companies trying to collaborate together. That might be maybe European projects, innovation partnerships, research collaborations. In 2007-11, I went back, did a PhD in Cork University Business School. And since then and before then, I suppose I've been working on a lot of these collaboration efforts. So it's really drawing on those experiences, but also the research we're doing in this area, as well as the research of others. So again, what I'm hoping to do is maybe just present a few ideas, and if then they resonate and people want to know more, we can maybe talk about them in the Q&A, or you can contact me afterwards. But broadly, the sort of 3-4 ideas are: first, I think sometimes we can see collaboration as a structural challenge, and we tend to deal with it structurally. We create structures, we divide those structures up, we try and manage the structures, govern the structures, and I'm just maybe putting the idea out there that sometimes that just isn't enough. So even though the structure's there, people don't necessarily collaborate, and it's maybe trying to understand why that is. The second one then related to that is maybe taking a more behavioral perspective on why it is people don't maybe collaborate and how we might be able to deal with that. And the third thing then is this concept of effectuation, which I think is a very valuable insight in terms of trying to understand how we can get collaboration, coopetition going, etc. Okay, so I suppose there is this idea: if you build it, they will come. You know, if you build a network, you build an ecosystem, collaboration will happen. And I think sometimes we're very disappointed with that. And very often we respond to that disappointment by maybe taking a knife to the structure of the network or the ecosystem. Maybe we divide it up into even more, maybe work packages, tasks, groups, etc. Then when they're not maybe working effectively, we could try and get maybe cross-topic going initiatives. Then if that doesn't work, maybe we look at governance, we look at management, we look at all these things. And I think sometimes the problem isn't necessarily the structure. And it's very interesting. I was just reading stuff during the week that I'd read a long time ago. I'd forgotten about it. I don't know if people came across this book called The Mythical Man Month. It's written by Fred Brooke about the challenges in software projects, written in the 1970s. But one of the things, and one of the key, I suppose, theses in his book is that if you add more people to a floundering project, it's likely to flounder even more. And I think sometimes it's the same with collaborations. Sometimes adding more and more people to let's say a network or an ecosystem that's already floundering actually probably damages it more than it helps. Okay, and I'll try and explain why that is shortly. So I think our natural instinct sometimes is to sort out these collaboration issues through structural changes. But really, when you look at a lot of the reasons for collaboration issues and collaborations, particularly in large groups, struggling, there's a whole range of reasons. The bigger the group gets, the more distributed the team members. The bigger the group gets, the more complex it becomes. The more complex it becomes, the more difficult it is to coordinate, the more difficult it is to communicate, the more challenging it is to build trust. Momentum starts to be lost. Then there's a fatigue sets in. There's social loafing, whereby some maybe partners are less likely to engage than others, yet are looking for the benefits. So there's a lot of these issues. A lot of them come down to behavioral issues, the way partners behave within these ecosystems. So I think there's some really nice research about understanding how is it that we scale behavior change. So collaboration is a behavior. How do we scale collaboration? I think to really understand that, you need we may need to understand there's two types of contagion. There's two mechanisms by which these types of change spreads. There's the thing called simple contagion, which is different to complex contagion. Okay, so if you take an example of a virus I suppose contagious through simple contagion. Just by being near someone, you're likely, or your chance of getting the virus increases. On the other hand, complex contagion is different. It's where the person has a choice. There's a deliberation. Okay, so an example would be the wearing of masks during the COVID pandemic. So the contagion of the virus itself was simple. It was all to do with just people being near one another. On the other hand, the wearing of masks was a complex contagion. People had a choice. You were more likely to wear a mask if the people around you that you knew best also wore masks. So I think in general, if we're talking about behavior change, it's a complex contagion. Just by putting people near one another, or by putting data there or information there, doesn't necessarily mean they will decide to collaborate. Okay, so what do we know? We know that general, if it's complex contagion, which this is, then what happens is the most effective way of growing change is within small groups, not large groups. Okay, so within small groups, generally, if a certain percentage of people around you adopt the change, you're most likely to adopt the change. We call that the tipping point. On the other hand, it's the same tipping point generally within a large group, but it takes more people to adopt the change before the rest adopt it. Okay, so in general, change is far easier if you change small groups first and leave a contagion. And there's lovely work research work by a guy called Damon Santola, who looks at large scale changes and finds that the most effective way of making change is along the edges, along the small groups first, before it moves into the center of the network, the ecosystem. And that's why, in general, when we do look at large change, it generally starts small, it starts local, it starts small sort of initiatives. And what happens then is if it grows there, you start to build momentum and trust. So these small projects are very effective ways of spreading change, but also building momentum and trust. If you try and do the same within a large network, it's incredibly difficult to achieve the same result. Okay, so this brings me to this idea of effectuation. How can you get these small groups then to maybe collaborate, innovate? And it's based on, again, research from a woman called Sarah Sarasvati, who really talks about that. And just in terms of a metaphor, maybe there might be two ways of achieving lots of initiatives. So like baking a cake, okay, there might be two ways of baking a cake. One is that you plan it all up front. You then go into your kitchen, you realize you don't have maybe all the ingredients, the utensils, and you go back replanning it, maybe re-procuring, whatever. The alternative is you go into the kitchen first, you figure out what utensils you have, what ingredients you have, and you then agree what's the best possible cake I can bake with what I have already got here. So sometimes we call this also an asset-based approach. You gather small groups around challenges. You pose challenges. You get them to either turn up if they're interested in it, and then you figure out what resources you have and say, okay, what's the best possible difference we can make by pooling what we already have here? And that's called effectuation. And it's based on certain principles, and I won't go into them in too much detail here, but one is you start with what you have. You start now rather than later. The purpose of starting now is you learn sooner. The purpose of learning sooner is you also build trust sooner, you build momentum sooner. And what happens then, in general, people, if they're happy, will start to commit more and more resources, more data, more knowledge, etc. So you start small, and generally you start with initiatives you know you can probably succeed at, just to build that momentum, trust. So this is based on this concept of effectual innovation, which is all about growing the best possible futures with what we already have and without taking undue risks, and then allowing, I suppose, human nature, psychology take over, where we then start to commit more and more to those initiatives. So for me, sometimes it isn't that data isn't available or that a platform isn't available or whatever. It's that we haven't got that fabric right, whereby individuals, organizations are willing to commit to initiatives. Sometimes the most effective way of doing that is getting them to commit to something that the risk is far lower they can see again, and then building momentum from there. Okay, so that's me, Sarah.
Great, thank you very much. Certainly inspiring for Task 43, as well as for lots of other reasons. I've got a few questions about that already, but I'll save it for the end. All right, Bethany, let's move on to you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. My name's Bethany Straw. I'm a biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, and am the assistant coordinator for the North American Bat Monitoring Program. And you might be wondering why we're talking about a bat monitoring program on today's webinar, but I think you'll find that there's a lot of common themes in the history and of how we've built this program with what my co-panelists have presented on and spoken to today. So I want to start off with just noting that there are 8 federally listed species listed as threatened or endangered in the United States, the first of which was listed in 1967. And we have additional species that are under review or on a work plan with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to review the status of that species. And despite the focus on bats and conservation, we actually have known very little about them, and it's been very difficult to monitor them, assess where they are, and how they're doing. And so to be able to do that and work towards recovery and conservation, there's been a lot of work over the past several decades to be able to do that. And so we're going through a little bit of history. I'm going to take you through a little bit of history from the program. And bat monitoring has been going on in North America for over 100 years. But one of the things that we've learned is bats are incredibly hard. And so I'm going to take you through not everything on this timeline that's taken us to where we are today. I'm actually going to start us in 1999 and highlight a couple of things that have led us to where we are. So back in 1999, there was a workshop that was held in Colorado with a bunch of what you could call bat experts who basically said, we know very little about our bat species, and we know the most about the ones that are endangered. And so it's kind of like we're learning about them after they're already in trouble. And so they got together and basically said, what are the challenges and what do we do about it? And the challenges that we face is bats are incredibly difficult to monitor. Not all monitoring types work well, but also access to data, discovery of data, it was incredibly difficult, to impossible. And that led us to a lot of knowledge gaps about these species, including stereotypical movement patterns, where they are, what their population sizes are, and true species ranges, where do they actually occur. And one of the major conclusions from this workshop that was documented in a 2003 report is that our best shot is to work together and follow common protocols and share data. It was a really big emphasis, but it didn't really gain any traction. And then the following year after that report was published, we had our first mass mortality event for bats at a wind facility. Where it was estimated that between 1,400 and 4,000 bats were killed at a single site in that survey season that year, which then highlighted we have a major threat or a potential major threat towards these species. And we still have these major knowledge gaps about them, where they occur and how they're doing. And now we're being presented with a new emerging threat. And so then in 2004, there was a workshop that was, I'm not going to go through all of these questions for the sake of time, but there was a workshop that was held, not dissimilar from the one that was held in 1999, but with a focus on mortality events at wind energy facilities and assessing what do we know and what do we need to know and how are we going to go about it. And they documented a major list of questions, many of which were related to some basic questions about bats. And simple questions like where do they occur, in what numbers, and how are they doing? How is that changing over time? But still, we didn't have anything that helped us come together and answer these questions. And then We have a new threat that's presented for our North American bat species that's discovered in 2007 from a photo that was taken in 2006, and which is a fungus, an invasive fungus that causes white nose syndrome and has caused mass mortality in bats. But in 2007 and in the years that followed, there were again a group of folks that said, okay, we don't know, we need to know what species are impacted by white nose syndrome. Are local populations indicative of what's happening with the range-wide population? And does the disease threaten population viability? So now we have these two big threats, or potentially big threats. At the time, we didn't know what the impact was going to be, and at a loss for how are we going to identify what species we need to focus on, what's the severity of impact, and how do we mitigate or manage for that. So this is where things really get good and collaboration really begins in earnest. And in large part, it was because there was federal funding and a large collective inertia, like for folks across multiple agencies, federal agencies, state agencies, tribal agencies, to work together and come up with a plan. But I have to admit, that really was supported by the fact that there was funding to coordinate the effort, that there were people who were staff, and it was part of their role and job to organize people and work on the relational aspect of this and all of the events that occurred to come up with in 2014, sorry, the implementation plan for responding to white nose syndrome. And there were several working groups that were established, and one of which was the Conservation and Recovery Working Group that held a series of workshops to identify what do we need to do. And one of the major things was we need to reflect back on that 2003 report from that 1999 workshop that says, okay, bats are hard. What are we going to do about it? What's our best shot? And we need to work together. And where it ended, one of the major outcomes was the plan for the North American Bat Monitoring Program, where they established common protocols that should be followed, the initial structure for a common database. And the same year that report was published, and this was a moonshot at the time, it wasn't an established program, it was an idea on paper that said, this is how we should move forward. And in the same year, in 2015, there was a trilateral agreement signed between the US, Mexico, and Canada, basically saying we need to work together on the conservation and recovery of the bat species that we share, because in short, they don't care about international boundaries or jurisdictional boundaries. And we all have a common interest in conserving these animals. After that, there was a coordinator for the North American Bat Monitoring Program that was hired, a master sample that was established, and in 2019, we had the database and partner portal, which is the front-end interface, were launched, and that really propelled us forward in terms of getting data, legacy data, and found data, and then new data that were being collected, reported to a common database. And that quickly led to, in 2021, the production of some science products that otherwise would not have been possible, because the discovery of those data and aggregation and collation was not possible previously. And so just to touch a little bit on what the North American Bat Monitoring Program is. So we have protocols and guidance. It's an opt-in program, but it's protocols and guidance that we have produced that reflect back on those best practices that were identified in 2003, and then through those workshops that the Conservation and Recovery Working Group identified, that says, it's really going to help us if we collect our data with common standards. And so some people do and some people don't, but that's available for folks to opt into. We also have a database where folks can, that are collecting data anywhere for any reason under any protocol, can report their data to a common database. And we have a master sample that allows folks collectively across the continent to follow a probabilistic sample so that we can draw inference to unsampled locations, and then a network. We invest a lot in engagement and building relationships with state agencies, tribal agencies, federal agencies, and bat researchers all over the continent so that we can work together in a common direction. The main objectives of the program as it was established and as it's implemented today is to increase the quantity and quality of data on North American bats, make those data discoverable so they may be accessed to address bat conservation problems and management needs. And so that one I just want to touch on quickly. It is not uncommon for there to be data that were collected that are on a hard drive, literally sitting on a shelf collecting dust. And there's no way to discover that or know who has it or pull them together if we don't have the infrastructure, the human and digital infrastructure that enables us to do so. So we want to move away from data collecting dust and put them in a common location where they can be accessed and utilized. And then we use these data to provide regular updates on the status and trends of North American bats. So a lot of those questions that we had at the beginning, like where are they, in what numbers, and how does that change over time? And then how can we relate that to these threats that they're experiencing? I just want to note that we can do nothing without the network. And as I said before, that we invest heavily in engagement with our network. We provide one-on-one user support. We have 4 technical working groups that focus on some of our primary monitoring types and establishing best practice and overcoming challenges. We have regional bat hubs, where it's really kind of a local collective that focuses on implementation within a region, implementing the program within that region, where they can focus more on what their regional interests are, what are the complexities there, as opposed to like this continental top-down approach. And it fosters collaboration at that more local level. We also hold a regular community of practice call and have a monthly newsletter. And this network across the continent of all different types of folks that are collecting bat monitoring data for different purposes. Since 2019, we have now collated nearly 100 million records across 5 data types. And it continues to grow every day, and we're expanding the database further. A primary tool that has enabled us to do that, obviously the human network and building those relationships is a key piece. But the backend database and the front end partner portal, really that technology that is serving as the forum for collaboration, is a massive piece. And that has really propelled us forward and make these data nimble and accessible for multiple different use cases, and make it easy for folks to contribute from any location, no matter where they are. And they have access to their own data through this portal. They can archive it there. It gets collated so that continentally we can put together these common products that benefit everybody. And they can be made available for others to access. But there are data sensitivities. And so we've implemented this process, a third-party data request process, where an original data contributor can submit their data to the database, and they identify what their sensitivities or restrictions are for their data. If they need to be, the location needs to be obscured, or if they want to withhold, they want any data request to be auto-approved, or if they want to reserve the right to approve or deny individual requests from third parties. So this allows anybody to submit a third-party data request. They filter to what their spatial area of interest is, species of interest, and other parameters, data type. And they submit that request, and then it goes out to those original data contributors who can review that request and either approve or deny, or say, yes, but I'm going to obscure my location. And it's connecting folks that otherwise would not draw those connections. And so with that, thank you for your time, and I look forward to questions.
Great, brilliant, thank you very much. Yeah, thanks all three of you for the really interesting presentations. All three of them are extremely relevant to what we're doing, and I'm really, really happy that I heard you make the presentations. I'd like to open the floor to questions. Can't be the only one with questions. Come on. I'll ask a question. Oh no, Jeff's going to ask a question. That's why he's turned his camera on. Go on.
I'm not exactly sure how to phrase it best, but I wondered if, as you all three were talking, I could see some kind of connections between the three talks, and I wondered if anything came to mind, your minds, about connections, connection points, the application, how that might help to with this. Some of the, I think, Bethany, you did a good job of showing what there was this value of, there's an ecological problem in that value proposition. Like, how can we kind of, I don't know if that's just kind of a general open question of if anything came to mind in your own minds.
I think I know what you're getting at, Jeff, and that the way I think about it from an ecological background is we have the issue of tragedy of the commons. Like, why should I opt in to share my data or that I have collected with blood, sweat, and tears, or that have a financial interest? Why should I take that risk to go out first and share it with somebody else? There's a lot of trust that needs to be built that says there's going to be equal participation and respect in that process. And there's a lot of unknowns. And so that is a really difficult problem to overcome. And the reason why it needs to be so relational and building trust. But you also can't let perfection be stop you from doing some good along the way. And you will have early adopters and you will have late adopters. And there will be some people who buy in earlier and then demonstrate the value proposition through that collaboration to others. And that's what we've seen with our program, is there was a lot of skepticism. A lot of people dug in their heels early on and didn't want to participate, but through time, as we've demonstrated the value that can be returned, we've gained this inertia and momentum that has just propelled forward. And so you can talk all day long. I think what I'm getting at is you can talk, you can try to convince people. What you really have to do is show them. And part of that is building the infrastructure and tools that enable them to, like, what's this forum or way that we're going to collaborate and share data, but then demonstrating what comes out of it.
I'm really interested in that, and I think it's really connected to what Paddy was saying as well. But what I'm really interested in for Task 43 is how did you fund that? Like, it's not a long-term business model to say someone's going to fund building this up and then we're going to try to operate it for the rest of our lives in a successful way. Like, what was your how did you build that, and do you have a business model for the long term?
I mean, to be honest, it started with federal funding. It's a federally funded program, and there are with the management of bats, there are state and federal charges for the conservation of species and preventing extinction. And so that's where a lot of the motivation came from initially. But where we stand now is wanting to expand and go forward. There will remain interest to continue to fund this program from the government. But there's a lot of limitations that we're running up against and ways that we need to grow. And so we have been exploring the idea with industry of something like a joint venture where there's equal participation or co-development between industry and agencies, government agencies, to work towards a common interest. I think really folks need skin in the game, but somebody has to go first. And in our case, I don't think we would be where we are if there wasn't that initial federal investment.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's probably, and just maybe the other side of the coin, even this week, I've spent time sort of in two very different environments. One was healthcare. The other was with one of the biggest energy companies in this side of the world, are in the UK. And they have the funding, and they're using the funding to develop internally. So you're then wondering, like, the whole idea of collaboration is you can share risk, you can share costs, you can share knowledge, etc. So I think there is an impediment, that for whatever reasons these companies are deciding to go it alone, to do it inside. I'm not sure they necessarily see always collaboration as a viable option. And I think part of that is they've never really been part of a successful initiative. And I think sometimes it's to get them going, that if we can provide them with lower risk, and yet some sort of reward, that they can actually try out those initial initiatives and then grow into the role of collaboration. But a lot of them are worried about the potential impact to reputation, maybe the potential cost of actually sharing data, whether that's a competitive cost or also an ethical cost, a reputation cost. So I think in some cases we just haven't given them the means to try out what a collaboration might look like. And sometimes they see these very big, large networks, and it seems like a very tall order to become involved. They're really complex, a lot of these networks. They don't even know how to get involved with them. Where do they start? And I think that is part of the issue here. There's no really easy place to start with collaboration.
I think on that note, maybe just to finish, I'd like to ask you, Paddy, if you have I think me and Task 43 are very interested in the things that you referred to in the presentation. That do you have like concrete recommendations, or even the literature you're referring to, maybe just links to that literature, but any concrete recommendations for how to implement some of these theories in real life? Because I honestly think that some of the stuff you talked about, we could start testing and trying out even within Task 43, but also within other ecosystems that some of us are building up. So, like, do you have concrete resources on that?
Yeah, like, this is the life I live. This is the stuff we do. Sort of on a daily basis. Are there other case studies outside of what we're doing? Yes. If you look at open source communities, it would be a classic example. We invite people to be part of these bigger challenges. They commit as much as they want. They learn through committing whether they want to do more or less of. So I would say open source is an example. A lot of actually research collaborations, that's the way they work. They start small, they build up. Unfortunately, the funders look for these pre-baked, very large initiatives that very often scare away potential collaborators, because it seems like a big ask to be involved in them. So what we do generally is step, and get people working together. If they like it, they'll do more of it. If they don't like it, they won't, and you just grow it from there.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I really like that thought. So I'm going to stop now because it's we've got to the top of the hour. But yeah, thanks again to the speakers and also to the listeners for taking part. And we'll be in touch with the recording. And yeah, if any of you are not in part of Task 43 yet but want to, then please do join us. I'll put the link in the chat. And yeah, that's it. So thanks everyone, and have a good afternoon or day, depending on what time zone you're in.
Yeah, and thanks, Sarah.
See you.
Thanks, Sarah. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.
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 See you guys.
Bye, y'all.